Mark Gross, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you very much. I like to start off by saying I probably hold the honor and the distinction of being the worst wrestler that you'll ever have on this podcast. So, but I really enjoy this show, and it's truly, man, it's an honor to be on this. And I've listened to so many episodes. It's very, it strikes a chord with me, a deep chord. And I'm truly, it's an honor, man, to be on it. So.
Well, thank you so much. If I had a nickel for every time someone told me they were the worst wrestler on this podcast.
Oh, is that right?
Oh my God. Everyone comes on here. They're like, man, you've had Smith, you've had Gable. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't, and you're a professional show writer, executive producer for CBS. So like, man, there's just such a cool angle you're bringing to this. And you just had a show go live, how we roll. We're going to get into that, but let's start at the Nebraska beginnings though, man. Tell us about where you grew up and some of your wrestling backgrounds.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the title of your show is so hits home so hard with me because wrestling literally changed my life, and it changed the trajectory of who I became and how I view things and how I approach every situation, personal relationships, business, my work ethic. It all came. I really believe a huge portion of that, majority of it, I think, came from wrestling. I grew up in Nebraska, and my parents came from, they were farmers, and they were, pretty, we didn't have money growing up, and we actually lived in a trailer house in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't even a town. My mother was a teacher at a one-room schoolhouse, literally a one-room schoolhouse. I know that sounds old-timey, but there were 12 students in the school, and my brother and sister and I were 3 of them. And then there were like 9 kids that were from just farms in the street, and we lived on a dirt road. There wasn't any pavement. So we lived in this trailer house, and that's how I started life, my first 5 or 6 years. And then we moved to the city when I was just finished kindergarten. So I was in first grade. My mom was like, we need to move to a bigger city to give us, opportunities. Obviously there was no one for miles around. And the year that I got there, this flyer came out at school that said, it was like wrestling. It was for wrestling, and I was so excited. I immediately, yes, this is for me. This is what I always wanted. Something that I always wanted to do. It's saying to me. It just, for whatever reason, it was very important to me to do this. So that's how it was. Literally a flyer from school, and my brother and I went, and it was a place called Ald Recreation, and it was like we lived in a very incredibly modest house, and it was for sort of kids that didn't have a lot of money, and it was free, and this wrestling program and whatever. There was boxing, there was it's just one of those city rec center kind of things. And the first day I got there, I immediately was like, this is going to change. I just knew in my heart this is going to change who I am, and that's where it all started. And I was probably 6 years old, and then I continued wrestling from that point on every year until I was a senior in high school, and made it all the way up to the captain of my senior wrestling team. But it was a huge part of my life every year growing up, and they're very formidable years, and it changed so much of like I said, of who I am and how I see things. So that was the origin. Yeah.
And so I want to go back real quick though. So you grew up in like a super desolate place, like not like no one around for miles, and you moved to Omaha then after that, or just a normal city?
No, we moved to Lincoln, the capital, okay. The capital of Nebraska. Yeah. And it was a thing where my mom, like she just knew that, you got 3 kids when you have no interaction, really social interaction, other than, when you're in this one. And I think she probably knew that academically, like, we were moving ahead of everyone, but she wanted to give us our best possible chance in life. And so I think that's part of the reason why we moved too. And, and we were, kind of hayseeds, I guess. My brother and I showed up on our first day of school with, we had fuzz cuts that she gave us from clippers in our kitchen, literally sitting on the counter, and we had matching outfits. My brother and I had his neon green shirts and these plaid pants, and we're both standing in line with these lunch bags. And this guy ahead of me starts making fun of me, and he's laughing at the two of us, and I think he pushed me, and then we went at it. We tangled immediately. So before I even set foot in the school on my first day, I got into a scrap with some guy out front. It was a bully. It was a bully, and yeah.
It's just crazy to me that there's spots, because you're a normal age guy, but there's spots that desolate even like 20, 30, 40 years ago. That's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, people think they're like, what is, because it sounds like, a little home on the prairie or whatever, little house on the prairie kind of stuff. But honest to God, that's what it was. My mom was the nurse. She was the principal. She taught every, kindergarten through whatever it was, 9, I think. And that existed. And this is, 1970-ish,
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I was, I'm 56. I was 5 years old, at the time. So, yeah.
So when you graduated high school, what were your aspirations for life? Like, did you know you wanted to be a stand-up comedian at that point?
Well, it's funny. Backing it up just a tad, when I started wrestling at Old, that was my thing. And I was very driven, and that was my interest. I had an injury. I had a cyst that grew in I was undefeated this one year, and I was having a very, very good season. And my coach, Tony, looked at the back of my knee, and he goes, "This guy's got a weird lump in the back of his knee. You better have that looked at." And I was, going to go to, I was on slated sort of to go to the Junior Olympics, which was a huge deal at the time. And then they found out that I had this mysterious growth in the back. They weren't sure what it was. So I ended up having to have surgery. And then like wrestling was so important to me. But after my surgery, and I was in the hospital for probably a really long time. They didn't have, things weren't as advanced back then. But while I was in the hospital, I realized I was joking around and making the nurses laugh and this kind of thing. And that's when I sort of was like, as much as I love wrestling, I really enjoy making people laugh. And that was a sort of a pivotal moment in my life. So yeah, I knew early on, and then I would stay up late at night and I would watch, the Tonight Show. And I remember one day my parents were in bed and I snuck out because I would watch Johnny Carson. It was this guy who was hosting the show at the time, who was very important to me too, and very, instrumental in my aspirations. And I was watching him, and there's a Comic-Con, and I was like relieved. I go, oh, that's what I'm going to do. Like, that's what I'm going to do with my life. I was relieved to go, you can do that. You can go on TV at night and talk about life in a funny way and make people. And I was like, that's it, man. I go, you'd be nuts to want to do anything other than that. I couldn't understand how everybody in the world wasn't doing that. It made no sense to me at all. I go, why would anyone do anything else? I didn't get it. So
how old were you at the time?
I was 10. It was 10, 11 years old. And I ended up having to have surgery twice. And but that downtime, it's weird, like interacting. I'm laying in this bed, but I really enjoyed comedy. And I became obsessed with finding the shortest way to deliver something funny in the fewest amount of words, describing an emotion or an event or something in a very short few words. So that became an obsession to me. But like I said, everything I learned from especially from sports was, it gave me the work ethic to because it's a seed where it's an industry where you're unlikely to succeed. And I think that a lot of the lessons my coaches taught me through the years, it gave me the grit and the determination to, you always have to believe you're going to win. You always have to think, I'm going to win this match. I'm going to win. And if you don't believe that, you stand a zero chance. It's over. So, but that became my lifelong obsession. And I started doing stand-up on a fake ID, my brother's ID, when I was 18. I wasn't old enough to get in the bar, but I wanted to enter this comedy competition, and I did so, and I did okay. Yeah, I ended up finishing like second, I think, in it. and this local, thing where those were professional comics, and I was this kid that wasn't even old enough to go in. It's funny, years later, I ended up touring with Dave Chappelle, and he has a similar story. Like, he used to go in, we would talk, and we had the same sort of, thing where we were both underage, sneaking into these clubs just because we wanted stage time so desperately,
Wow.
So,
you toured with Chappelle?
I did. Yeah. He, but it was before Chappelle's show, before he really blew up. Look, he's a phenom. He's a one in a million. It's still to this day, probably personally my favorite comic I've ever worked with. And he was younger than me. It was weird. I think we met. Did we meet at the Melrose Improv in LA or no? We were in Cleveland. We were at the Cleveland Improv, and I was the feature act. There's like an opener, a feature, and a headliner, and Chappelle was the headliner. And he makes it look effortless. He is a gift that very few of us have, and it's almost frustrating because you're like, I'm jumping time here, but skip to years later where he and I ended up becoming friends, and we had the same agent. So we would go out together, and we'd be driving to a show, and something would happen along the, like he liked McDonald's. We would stop at McDonald's one, I remember this one, and that's the limo guy pulls over, and we both go in there. And of course, everybody stops doing their job. This is before Chappelle. This is how popular he was. And people stopped doing their job. They just quit working, and they came out, and everybody's talking to Chappelle, and there's this big line of cars going, and people are pissed off, but everybody wanted to come out to go, holy crap, Dave Chappelle is here. And then we would drive to the gig, and then he would have 3, 4, 5 minutes on what happened on the drive to the gig that it would have taken me 7, 8 months to write, to hone it down and perfect it into a bit. And he writes third draft. His first draft of a joke is like everybody else's 15th or 16th draft. So
he could just do it that day, like turn something like that into a bit within a couple hours.
He could, and then he would hone that to where it's even more perfect. So, but again, I would always go, there were times like that where I go, I am not Chappelle. I will never be Chappelle. I don't think like he thinks on another level, and I would be with a guy like that, or I'd be at the Improv, I'd be up for a Tonight Show myself, auditioning for Tonight Show. And there's Mitch Hedberg. There's these comics that are, who was also a great friend. And I just remember one night it was Mitch. It was like, oh God, who else was there? But anyways, there was this array of guys who had all were better than me. But I remember thinking I would always go, what advantage? Like, I can't control that these guys are have more experience, or they're better known, and they're, I don't have Dave's. I go, well, what edge can I have? And it's the same edge that I had in wrestling, which was like, I know what I can control is I can outwork all these guys.
Yeah,
I can outwork them, and that will be my advantage. And that's what I did. And I was, I always tried to go extra. I was like the guy who ran extra. I was the guy who wrote extra. These guys are sitting around the bar having drinks, whatever. You guys do that. You guys sit there and talk about how other people are getting comedy specials that you're not getting and how unfair it is. I'm going to go home and work on my act. And that's the same way that, Coach Pierce, my high school coach, was like, you want to sit around and talk about why you lost, or you want to get out there and work and figure it out, so those types of things, I think, carried with me to this day. And I bring it up in every writing room that I'm in now. I bring up that work ethic. I'm like, you guys, you don't start, working the minute you sit down at the table. You never stop working. Like, and it was the same way, before a tournament or something. You think about it all day long. You think about that's your preparation. That's how you get an advantage. You come in thinking about the show. You come in thinking about character. What joke am I going to pitch if this doesn't work? What's if this story has the second act doesn't hold up, what am I going to pitch to fix it? Because it's very competitive. It's an insanely competitive industry. And if you're either I was always like, you're either the funniest guy in the room, or you're everybody else. And if you're everybody else, you're going to be unemployed. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I think a lot of that comes from for me, it came from wrestling.
Well, even like a simple concept, like believing that the harder you work, the more successful you're going to be. Some people have like a fixed mindset and don't even believe that, right? So they don't even really truly believe that if you set out a goal and work for it, you can accomplish it. So like once you've wrestled and you see yourself getting better, you have the confidence to put yourself out there and to do other things. So how did you like come to the decision to leave Nebraska and move to LA to like put yourself out there in that scene?
That's a great question. I just knew, I had a paper route. I had, I worked hard on, as a child and a very good work ethic. But while I was there, I was constantly writing jokes. Like while I was delivering papers, walking around, I was thinking of material. I was thinking of jokes. I would write, short stories and things. So it was a constant thing that I just always knew I was going to do that. So my parents, I think I'm glad college was very important to me, and I knew I wasn't good enough probably to wrestle in college, and I just didn't have that skill set. So when I did go to college at Nebraska, I would go to this bar called Duffy's Tavern. It's on O Street, Lincoln. So they had a comedy night that they started there literally when I was there, that to this day they still have.
Wow.
And I would use it. I would say, this is part of my curriculum. This is part of my, my school. Like I have to write 15 new minutes every week, which at the time I was an idiot. I didn't know you can't write 15 minutes in a week. Every week I'd be like, I'm going to do a new 15 minutes. And I would try and do that every week. Well, of course it sucked, but you might get 1 minute out of that. But I was like, I'd have to have new stuff because it's the same audience coming every week. So, if you told the same, the thing about jokes is like entertainment. Ultimately it's a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
If you've heard a joke before, you're not going to laugh at it as hard as second time because you've heard it before, so you know what's coming. So that's what entertainment is. If you know the killer's in the closet, or it's less tense than if you don't. So it's sort of that same rule applies for all things. But I would do that every single week. I would write, and I ultimately did like I said, my lifelong goal was always to do the Tonight Show, and I ended up doing that. And I think 2 of the jokes that I originally wrote at Duffy's in Lincoln on those weeks when I would go every week, I ended up doing on the Tonight Show.
Wow.
20 years later or whatever, 15 years later.
I saw the clip of you on there with Jay Leno. I love the bit about the homeless people, but if they're like really hard out on cash or something, they'll work really hard. I'm butchering it, but it was funny. And it was like, I was thinking about that earlier as you were telling me that about, like watching it as a 10-year-old when you went on there. I think it was like 2001. That had to be a huge moment.
It was huge. It was everything I ever dreamed of. And it's sort of a silly goal. Now looking back, I tell my daughter this, like your goal shouldn't be, if your goal is specific, like I want to be on the Tonight Show, that's not a great goal. Like it's a good thing to say I'm going to do that, but what you have to do in this industry is you have to love the process, and you have to because a specific result you can't control. They may go, we don't want a guy who looks like, the person booking the show might go, you look like a guy that I went to high school with that was, that I didn't like, and he slept with my girlfriend or whatever, and then you can't control that. So your goal should be, I'm going to be the best comic that I can possibly be, and I'm going to be the best in my industry or whatever your thing is. Like I said, in wrestling, I was always like, I'm going to be the best wrestler I can. And you have to believe that you're going to succeed, but your goal should be, you have to love what you're doing. You have to love the process, because there's no guarantees. There's no, if your goal is fame, you're going to end up unhappy, because that's not a good goal. Your goal should be, I'm going to write the best jokes. I'm going to write and tell stories that move people and inspire them and make them laugh and make them forget their problems for a while or whatever. Like that should be your goal, not something specific. That's my feeling. It's not something specific, looking back, but right. But it was a very special moment. My grandfather, who was a farmer in Beatrice, Nebraska, was alive at the time, and he had lost his, my grandmother had died years ago. This isn't a funny story, but I used to send him postcards all the time on the road. Like that, we always had the same sort of dry sense of humor, and I would send him like a post, like I would say I'm in Cleveland, for example, and then I would have there would be a picture of the bridge in Cleveland, and then I would draw like a stick guy jumping off the bridge, and then I would say, "There's me after second show Saturday night," or whatever. Like we had a very gallows sense of humor. And he, years later, I found out, after he had, passed away, my aunt gave me this envelope and said, he saved every one of your postcards, and he would show them to people when they would come over for lunch. Like the neighbors would come in, he would always show them and go, look at my grandson. He's in Miami. He's in, Rochester, New York. He's in Boise, Idaho, whatever. And he would show them these, but he was a fan of mine, and we had a very close relationship. And he bought a new television set. Like I told him, I go, Grandpa, I'm finally doing the Tonight Show. And he was so happy. And he bought a brand new TV set just to watch it on. And it was a flat screen because he had one of those old, ones that weigh like 900 pounds. And he bought it. But then, the sad part of the story is that he died like, right before I actually got to be on the show. But I had a picture of him and when that literally is in my jacket. I wear a suit on stage always. He always told me to dress up for the show, always dress up for the people. So I would always, wear a tie and stuff. I took a lot of crap for that too, by the way. You're doing some horrible gigs and people are like, who's this guy with a shirt and tie? But anyways, I had his picture. So the last thing I did before I went out there, they wipe your mouth off, with a towel, and they give you water, and you're standing there and the music, you hear the band playing, and they were playing Sympathy for the Devil, I remember. And I'll never forget that moment. And you hear him, and then Jay's going, hey, bring it in, next guy. And he's doing that. The last thing I did was I looked at this picture of my grandpa, and then I went out, and it was very much like what I anticipate death to be like. You're going, well, this is it. I'm about to hurl my soul into the great unknown, because you don't know. You prepared as much as you can, but you don't know. You don't know how it's going to go. And it ended up, going okay for me. It ended up going pretty well for me, and they booked me back on the show again and whatever. But it's, it was a huge frightening moment. But the thing, I think one of the things that parallels wrestling is when you're a comic, it's you alone on this stage, and it's you, and that is it. It's you. But instead of, wrestling a guy, it's you and your teammate is this audience, and you have to read them. You have to anticipate what's their move, what's their tone, what's the, and I really feel like there's so many similarities between the two things. But yeah, and the fear of that, you overcome that fear. When you're looking a dude in the eye and you're in high school and you're both standing there naked about to weigh in on this scale, then you're going to go out and the guy's, he has a better record than you, and you sense that he's going to win. That fear, overcoming that fear and believing, no, I'm not going to lose. No. This audience, they chewed up this guy before me. They ate him for dinner. I was in San Diego one night. The audience literally, they called the sheriff department because they thought a riot was going to break out. There was like 400 people, and they're all going, "Wah!" And this guy's doing like, they're like, boo, get it. Like, it was really this, you feel that, like you sense the audience. You're going, this guy's going to turn, and they're going to start throwing like this can. So this is going to get out of hand. So this club owner called the state patrol, and all the people showed up. And he looked at me, and he's like, can you? And I go, just hold on. And I calmly went out, and they didn't know who I was. I was the guy who had done the time, but who cares? You're not a name. You're not a household name. But I went out the microphone, and I just coolly, I slowed it down, and I read them, and I earned their, I earned their trust. And I ended up and the club owner ended up hugging me and kissing me at the end of it. He was so happy that but it's that same training of like, I'm not afraid. Like if you lose your confidence, you got nothing. Then You're done. You are done. That's when everybody wins. When you lose your confidence, it's everything,
It's crazy you say that, because the emotions you felt before you went out there, and I was kind of thinking about it as I'm watching you. It's like, that's not really a normal set. You would do a normal set by this point in your career, probably doing 20, 30 minutes, maybe a full hour. You're going out there doing 5 minutes. And it's kind of like probably a weird setting compared to what you're used to. I mean, is it like recorded at night? Is it the middle of the day? Like, how does it work when you're on a show like that? And what's that process?
Well, it's funny. My thing was always, I ended up going, I'm all in. So I lived on the road. Like there were 2 years where I never went home. I just was in a different city every week. I just said, there's no finish line. There's no, like, when am I going to get home? 6 more weeks till I get home. 4 more weeks till I get home. And then I started going, why are you thinking like that? Quit thinking how many more weeks till I have a break, and just think, this is it. This is my life. This is what it is. I go, you serious about this or not? Do you want to do the Tonight Show? Okay, then this is your life, and this is what it has to be. So like, you know, when I was listening to the Smith episodes, I was so moved by that because I was like, oh my God, that's the same mentality that I had to have. I had to go, you have to be better than everyone. You have to be willing to give more, and you got to go all in. It's just, there's too much at stake and it's too competitive. So you have to. So I just said, I'm not going home anymore. And I just literally worked every week. And at the end of that 2 years, I ended up doing the Tonight Show. But what I would do, in answer to the question, yeah, you do a 45-minute set. So you're doing your best bits, you know, in a 4.5-minute set for the Tonight Show. And I started going, okay, I'm doing this bit here, and I'm going to close with this. It's my strongest bit. And I go, we'll start off with your Tonight Show set. Follow your best material. So I started doing my Tonight Show as my opening 5 for 2 reasons. One, it prepares you. So on tape night, when it happens, it's solid and it's tight and it's seamless, but it also forces you to make the rest of your material stronger because you're following your closing bit. You know, you're following your best material. Like, it's like having someone open for you that's unfollowable, except for it's you.
Then you have 35 minutes to go.
Then you have 35 minutes to go. And the waitresses normally put checks down at like with 10, 15 minutes left. So you got to be really strong because people are distracted. They're going, who ordered the daiquiri? People are arguing. And that's when people are buzzing and talking. And you got to still hold their attention and then bring it home and go, wow, that ticket price was worth my money. Mm-hmm. So it forced me to make the rest of my act stronger. But that's what I did. And that it always worked out for me.
So when you're on the road, are you literally not going home at all? Like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're doing shows? Is like what's the day in the life like during the week?
Yeah, well, back in the day, and it's not so much like this anymore, but you know, this is like 90s, 2000s. Back then, clubs would go, you know, traditionally, I worked for a lot of a comedy chain called the Funny Bone and the Improv. And, it was usually like average would be like a Tuesday through Sunday. So you do one show Tuesday, one show Wednesday, one show Thursday, 2 shows Friday, either 2 or 3 shows on Saturday. There's a midnight show, and then 1 show Sunday, and then Monday was your travel day. So,
wow.
Yeah, so that's the way it was back then, and comedy was booming, and it was like vaudeville, man. It was almost like, I was so lucky. I was born at the exact right time that this could even exist and happen. Like, I couldn't have dreamt of a better life. And so that's, that was sort of the life. And instead of flying home on Monday or whatever, I would just be like, just work or taking a week off. I would just be like, just work every week, man. Let's do this. Let's take this seriously. And so that's when I made that shift. And not to say I didn't work hard before that, but that's when things really turned around for me. And I got the Montreal Comedy Festival, which was a huge, thing at the time. It still is a pretty big deal, but everybody in the country wants to do the Montreal Comedy Festival. And again, I attribute this to wrestling too. I auditioned for Montreal and I worked so hard, right? I can't even tell you the hours I put in is honing this set and making it seamless. And I would literally, at night when I was laying in bed in my hotel room, I would do my set backwards. I would do the closing bit in order, then I would flip it. I would do it the other way in my head. I worked, I was relentless. And then I auditioned, I go, that's as good as I could do. And I'm a very honest guy. In fact, I'm critical to a point of myself. I'm telling you, I had a good set. Like, it was a really good set. And I never say that. You ask anybody that's worked with me, like, wow, he never says that. But it was a solid set and I didn't get it. I didn't get Montreal. So I met these other comics and they're all going, and they're grumbling about, how it's rigged and it's this and it's that and blah, blah, blah. And again, I was like, you guys do that. You guys complain and say why you didn't get it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work so hard this next year, because you have to wait a year to audition again. I go, I'm going to work so hard this year. I'm going to double my workload. I'm going to work so that next year, even if they hate me, even if I'm their least favorite person, I'm going to have such a funny set that they have to put me in. And I kept that attitude, and I didn't give up. It was heartbreaking. I was crestfallen. I'm not going to lie to you. It was easy to be depressed and defeated, but I chose to go, okay, that means I got to work harder. And that's what I did. And then I got it the next year, and that comedy festival changed my life. That's what, led me to the Tonight Show and various other things.
Where were you when you heard the news you didn't get in the first year? Were you like right there at the place still, or? No,
they wait, they're like, hey, we're still looking at other people. I was on the road somewhere and I was with a guy who I had auditioned with, and he I'm not gonna say who is, but he's a fairly notable guy. And he was grumbling and complaining and belly aching. And I was like, all right, I'm not gonna be that guy. I'm not gonna be you. And in comics, we all call each other. Did you get it? No, of course not. And you can't get any more. It's like, unless you have an agent or and it's like, and that was all crap. That's not true. None of that is true. For everybody who has succeeded, and there is always a point where they could have said, this is impossible, I can't do it. And the ones, obviously, you have a 0% chance the minute you say that. And the only ones who make it are the ones who continue on. And not all of them make it either. And that's the true heartbreaking nature of our industry. Just because you want it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But you have to, that's why I'm saying the journey has to be your passion, not the result,
I love it. I love all these, like, just these stories of like pushing up the mountain, because I don't think people realize just how hard it is to achieve that level of success in any field. And, the one thing wrestling teaches us, that even if you put in all the work, or you think you have, you're probably not going home as the state champ that year. And then you get out in the real world and you're like 25, 26, and you realize that you weren't even working that hard, or that you had like these mental things in your head holding you back. And then now that you're finally in your career, 25, 26, you can apply these lessons. There's only like, a select few of them who apply it in high school. And those are the kids we all looked up to. But once you get out there in the real world and you're applying them, like you said, it's amazing how far it can go. I mean, did you ever bump into any other wrestlers while you were out there on the road in those years?
Oh yeah. Greg Warren is very tight, very close friend of mine. Yeah, he's hilarious. And we met in, oh God, where were we? We may have been in Missouri somewhere, and he was still working for Procter and Gamble. And he started talking about wrestling and his actor. And I go, hey man, I was a wrestler. I wrestled for 12 years. And it's a huge part of my life. So we started talking, we immediately became friends. We've been friends ever since. And of course he was clearly a very gifted and talented wrestler. But yeah, him and oddly enough, here's a good wrestling story for showbiz wrestling. I was writing on a show. The director was a guy named James Burrows, who's a pretty notable guy. He did he's one of the co-creators. He created Cheers and he's directed everything. Big Bang Theory, The Friends, Two and a Half Men. Mary Tyler Moore, all the way back to that. He did.
He's on all those shows.
All those shows, Mike and Molly, a show that I was on from beginning to end. Oh God, Frasier. I mean, it just goes on and on. The list. He's the most successful director of my lifetime, of my generation, and whatever. So he was directing this show, and I knew that this was an opportunity to this guy I've revered, and for so many years. So again, I was the last guy. Like, I would be in the writer's room. All the cars would leave, and I would stay, and I would be like, if Burroughs is standing there, because here's what happens in multicam. And I'm getting to your question of wrestling part of this in a second. But you're on set, okay? So there's a live studio audience, and they're all down, up, on. There's a guy up there warming up the crowd, and you're on set. You got James Burroughs, who's a legendary Hall of Fame. It's like Michael Jordan of comedy directors, okay? Like, there's no, like, just the, LeBron, whatever you want to say, whoever you want to say, it's the best. And he's obviously the greatest, and he's standing there, and I was like, if the audience is carrying on, there, every moment that ticks is money. And so we do a joke, you're doing a scene, and the joke doesn't land. And all of a sudden, okay, stop. Okay, the joke didn't work. And then you stop, and okay, well, that was an alt, meaning that was a joke that we had written because the first one didn't work. So now you're pitching on the floor. So they stop. The crowd's looking at you. Burroughs is looking at you. The actors are looking at you. Chuck Lorre, or where the executive producer, turns his head and looks at you, and he's staring at you, going, "What do you got?" And that moment, that's your moment, and everyone's waiting, and you got to be able to take everything out. You got to be able to go, forget about the audience. Forget about Melissa McCarthy. Forget about Chuck Lorre. Forget about Burroughs. Forget all that stuff. And just for 1 minute, look at this page and think, how are you going to win? What's the joke? What's the line? And I think the fear and the of again, that you overcome. And I think I attribute wrestling to all of that, was helped me get an edge. And also obviously being a comic, and I would stop and be like, okay, a lot of times you're on stage and your joke doesn't work and the audience is heckling you, whatever. You got to be ready to, what do you got? What are you going to say? And so that's the pressure of, that's why writers are paid a lot of money in multicam, because it's like, you got to, this has to, you got to deliver when the time is right. And anyway, so this show
how much of the lines said on TV are written as they're written versus made up, like as the process goes, do you think?
Like 5% we have to fix normally. If it's a good show, 5, maybe 6% of and it's usually just a joke. Like by the time you're taping the story, either you've discovered the story works or it doesn't work because you've done several rehearsals and a table read. But sometimes jokes, they work at rehearsal and then you get in front of the audience and the audience keeps you honest and they're like, nah, I'm not having that. And you're like, uh-oh, that's flat. That didn't work. Even though you've tried it and it's no, this is it. You that's the beauty of this thing. It's unpredictable. You never know. But I was on this show. The point of saying all this on this show with Burroughs, and there was Jay Moore was the star of the show, the actor Jay Moore. And Jay it turns out, was a really good wrestler. I don't know if you knew that.
I have heard that. Yeah.
So we were rehearsing. The show was called Gary Unmarried. And I still say it was one of the funniest shows I've ever been on. Like nobody's heard of that show. No one's heard of the show. But if you watch we had a really strong joke run. We had some of the funniest guys I've ever worked with. And we had a blast on that show. It was really fun. And Burroughs directed. But it was I was pitching to do a wrestling episode, because of whatever. And I go, so Jay's kid is wrestling. And then, oh my God, Kirkner was playing from, oh no, I hope I'm not saying his name wrong. I'm not picking the wrong guy, but it doesn't matter. But the guy from 40-year-old from Anchorman,
okay,
not 40-year-old version, from Anchorman. Anyways, so he was on it. He was playing the wrestling coach for the others, and Jay Moore's kid was wrestling. So at a rehearsal one day, we get done and there's the mats all laid out on the stage. It was, and so out of habit, I just like, God, it'd feel good to, man, I would like to get on that mat just to feel it again. It's been so many years. So I got out there and I just was, got down in referee's position in the thing. And all of a sudden I feel this hand go wrap under my stomach. And then there's this other hand on my elbow. And I look up and it's Jay. And I'm like, are we going? And he's like, let's go. So we go. We start, and he the guy outweighs me by, I don't know, 30 pounds, whatever. But we start wrestling and everybody's going, oh my God. And they're like gathering in Burroughs. Everybody's sitting there watching us. It's just a rehearsal day. And we keep going. Then people are sick of watching it and they start leaving. Like it went on and on. It was just, we just kept going and going. So people start to leave and he and I just kept going. And I couldn't tell you how long we wrestled, but I'll tell you this, that the next day he showed up in my office and I still have the t-shirt upstairs, but he gave me a autographed Iowa State t-shirt that was autographed. Hold on, I don't want to embarrass myself here.
Gable? No,
it was Carl. Oh my God, who was the undefeated wrestler from Iowa State? This is making me look like an idiot. It should have been my. I wasn't planning on telling this.
Carl Sanderson.
Carl Sanderson. Thank you.
Yeah.
My homework. All right, so we won't play that part. I'll just say this. He gave me an autographed T-shirt of Carl.
We'll trim it out.
And I was like, he goes, I met this guy. He goes, I met Carl. I was doing the ESPN radio, and we had him on. And he goes, I want you to have this. And he goes, because he goes, you're small. He goes, but you have like ape-like strength, And I go, it's not that, Jay. I go, I just, I'm not the super strong guy. I go, but I knew how to, I knew how to not to quit, and I wasn't going to let you have this. Everybody's watching, but we went at it for several minutes, and people still talk about that. Whenever I run into Burroughs, it's like, gross, for wrestling more on the thing. But it was a fun episode, and it was great, and that it bonded us, a little bit, and And I would always say, I'd be like, if I'm hiring a writer's room and there's a wrestler versus a non-wrestler, I'm going to hire the wrestler 100% of the time. If it's a jump ball, 100% of the time, because I know he's going to work harder than anyone else, without a doubt. I've never 100%. Met a wrestler who was outworked by anyone else in my entire life. Never. I've never experienced that. So
that is amazing. It's crazy how, if you haven't wrestled in a while, how tired you get just after like 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And like the next day you're bruised up on your neck. You're like, man, I'm soft now. Yeah. So tell me about so you went from being a stand-up comedian, you had a family, you transitioned to being a writer. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about like the process for like the script you just wrote for like How We Roll. How do you start it, and how long does it take for you to go from first draft to getting it in front of someone's eyes at can make a decision on it?
Well, that's a great question. I was on what's called my deal was a little different. I was on what's called an overall deal at CBS. I was on the show called Mike and Molly with Melissa and Billy Gardell, who is also a wrestler, by the way, a great wrestler, Billy Gardell. He was a very good wrestler.
Really?
Yeah. He was really good. So anyways, but I was on that for 6 seasons. And at the end, CBS said, Chuck was like, hey, do you want to, I'm developing this show, and I love Chuck and I admire him, and I'm on the map because of that guy, Burroughs. Like he was a mentor to me, but I just felt the need to I got to go off and see what I can do kind of on my own. So I took this thing, it's called an overall deal with CBS, where you're developing new shows rather than, on your own. So I took that deal and went with them. So I would be writing on a show while I was also developing a show. So what you do is you come up with your premise, whatever it is, and you start. For me, it's always about character. You always start with character, and the characters have to be organic, and they have to be real. I mean, you and I talk about this. It's like, it's storytelling. It has to be driven by emotion, not event. Meaning, the story has to be, if like, hey, it's Ryan's birthday, we're having a party for him. That's not a story. That's an event. How does Ryan feel about his birthday? How does Ryan, like, that's the story. Who's involved? So that was always my approach, was write it like a soap opera, break the story like it's a soap opera, then write it funny. And if your characters are well developed and if they're not really telling jokes, they're giving their opinions, they're saying how they feel about whatever the story is that week, the situation. If you're watching Frasier, let's say, for example, which was a show that I thought was great, exactly what, Frasier versus his father's take was going to be on whatever the matter was. So you're almost laughing once you see the situation unfold. You're laughing because how that person feels about it. And then if you're a good writer, you find a way for them to say that in a way that is organic to their character, but is also surprising and funny to the audience. It can't be what the audience is thinking, or they're not going to laugh. So that was always my approach. And I then you pitch it. So you start off with that. You come up with a good story. You pitch it to the studio. So I would go to like CBS studios and
have you written a full script yet, or just like an overall idea?
Well, at the very beginning, like, I have a path. Like, I go, I think I know what this pilot story is going to be. I have an idea what the pilot story is going to be. But you go in and you say, okay, this is a show about, whatever your show is about, and you start off with characters, and I would pitch to, Alec Botnick and Kate Adler and the people at CBS, and then they would say, okay, yeah, we like this idea. So that's step one. We like it. Let's do this. We're going to buy this. Let's take it to the network. Then you go to the network and you pitch the network, and then the network says yes or no. And that's the next hardest hurdle to get over, because they're the ones that are investing. They're investing money in it as well. So they're like, okay, we'll buy it. And if you sell it in the room, that's a huge thing. I've been very lucky. I've sold since I started developing I guess over the last 6 years, I have managed to sell. I've sold every show that I pitched, luckily. And it helps that I'm on a deal at CBS, granted. But
so you're getting paid the whole time, not just when the shows are picked up?
Correct. That's me. That was my deal.
Got it.
So then the network, buys, but they still have to spend the money, so they buy the show. Then you go off and you write an outline, and then you go through all the channels, of the studio and the producers and whoever that's involved. And then the network gives their notes. Then you write the pilot, then you turn in the pilot, and then that's usually around end of December. And then you wait and see what they pick up, and if they're going to shoot it. And that's when they're dropping, $3 million, $2, $3, $4 million to shoot your show. That's a huge hurdle. Then you have to cast it. Then you cast it, and you hope that they put it on the air. And that's the last step. And then you hope that it does well. Then you hope it gets a second season. And so but you're competing against thousands of scripts, and thousands of other pitches. So it's obviously very competitive,
How often is it too where you love your idea, but then by the time it goes through all these channels, your idea has been altered, and is like that hard to accept, or is that just an inevitable part of writing?
That happens in my finding 100% of the time. It's altered. But my thing is team. Again, a wrestling tournament isn't won by one weight class, it's won by a team. Mm-hmm. So I always think that magic comes when everybody's is together. And when you're the showrunner, you have to certainly weed out the stuff that's not good and helpful, but you also have to include everyone, and that's what makes it stronger. I often think of the the U.S. basketball team that year that we lost in the Olympics, and I was like, what? But I always felt like it was, and with no disrespect at all, but it felt like more individual performances rather than a team effort. And I always remember watching that game going, those guys shouldn't have lost that game, man. And so I'm always like, that's always my philosophy, is like, you're stronger when you work together, when everyone's contributing. But again, it's my job to make sure that the wrong contributions aren't being made. So you live with it, and there's standards and practices. There's all sorts of that they base S&P. They basically go, hey, you can't say this word because it's didn't pass our it's offensive or whatever. So you have to find a different way to say. But there's all these different input that you get from all these different people and studio and network, everybody that sort of helps shape it, and hopefully it's for the better. And more times than not, it is for the better, I will say. But sometimes it's not, and then you just have to live with it,
Yeah, it's part. I just can imagine it's got to be part of it. We're gonna wind down here, but just a couple more questions. Tell me about, like, once you get the green light and you have to write the pilot. Tell me about your writing process. Do you write at the same time every day, and like how long do you go for?
It's one of those things where, like, unfortunately, it's not like training where, I'm going to train for how, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do, this amount of, I'm going to run the stairs this many times. I'm going to, I'm going to do this many drills, because it's sort of comes when it comes, unfortunately. But the more time you spend doing it, the better results you're going to have, just like anything else. So I start in the morning, and I lock myself away, and I try and get myself in a weird place, like in a weird mindset where I'm like, I'm focused, but I'm not trying too hard. I had an expression, I have two things before I write a pilot. I hang a little sign that says simplify, simplify, simplify. It's really a matter of breaking something down and making it simple, like, telling it the story simply and hitting the emotion, again, the emotional aspects of it. It's not a situation. It's a comedy. It's a sitcom, but it's more about, it's not about the situation. It's about the comedy and the characters, and why do I care about them? What's driving them? So I will start in the morning, and I will keep, that simplify philosophy, until I'm basically exhausted, but leaving myself enough to know that I'm not going to be fried for the next day. And so that's sort of my procedure, and it works. It works for me. Some people like being in a public place. I don't. I like being isolated, and that's when you come up, I think, with with weird stuff that other people aren't thinking of. You have to think differently than everyone else, otherwise you're going to produce the same thing.
Right. No, it's interesting just to hear everyone's got something that works, unique for them. And then tell me about, like, once you actually get the show picked up and you're filming, like when you're on a film set, is it just 12 hours of craziness, or what's that like?
Well, I do pretty much just multicam. So, we it's like a play. Basically, I've written a play, like Norman Lear, wrote these amazing plays when I was a kid. And I go, oh my God, this is gripping. This is about America. This is about me. This is about, it's about, controversial matters. And he was very inspiring to me. So basically that's what you're doing. You're writing a play, and then you're pointing 4 cameras at it, and we'll tape it, and, we'll pre-shoot the day before. So we'll do 2 or 3 scenes sometimes just to have them. And then we'll do playback. So when you hear, a lot of people think, oh, it's a laugh track. Well, it's not. It's an audience literally watching the show and laughing at the stuff you pre-recorded, and then watching it live and laughing at the stuff that's being performed in front of them. So that it's, and the usual start around 6 p.m. and if you have a great director and your script is solid and your cast is good, you're out of there by 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And if you're having a rough go of it, you always hear when there's a pilot that's like, they were there till 3 or 4 in the morning. You're always like, whoa. So that's, not a great sign, but
so you get through one whole episode from 6 to midnight, though.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then you cut it, and then you have, because you have the reverse, you have the angle of every camera. So you're literally just cutting together, and that's an art in itself, because you're literally building performances. But, if you and I are having a conversation right now,
right.
And so let's say we're doing a scene right now, like there's a camera over my shoulder showing your reaction to what I'm saying, and there's a camera over your shoulder showing me telling you. So then when you go to editing, as opposed to single cam, like a movie, like The Office is single cam, Lost is single cam, Friends is a multicam. Obviously those are two very, whatever, different examples. But the Friends episodes are shot very shortly, but when they're edited, you don't have to, like in a single cam, they don't have to stop. Like, okay, hold on, just swim the camera around, get the other reverse thing or whatever. Like it's done immediately. And that was something that started, back in the, way back in the day, back in the 50s, 60s, I think the multicam came to existence. So yeah, it's a different way of, it's just a different format completely, but it has the magic of theater. It's sort of a hybrid between live theater and a movie kind of thing, if that makes sense. It's sort of a hybrid between the two, because you are performing in front of a live audience, but you're also, taping it. And it's an art for sure.
It's interesting. I grew up watching Seinfeld and grew up on Friends. And I never actually knew that they were real people there until I started researching for this interview, actually. Like, it sounds crazy to say that out loud, and you're probably shocked to hear that, but I did not know that. So like, there's people there watching it go down, and like kind of get the behind the scenes of how it's all. That's crazy. For
sure. In fact, the show that I created, that I'm on now, is actually filmed on the Seinfeld stage, where they filmed all the Seinfelds on the Radford lot. So wow. Pete Holmes actually has Jerry Seinfeld's dressing room. So it's a really great. It's a huge honor to be on that stage. And it is the same audience, same audience seating and all that stuff. It's all right there on the Radford lot in Studio City. So wow. It's truly an honor to be on that stage.
Crazy. Well, it's been such an honor to have you on here and to pick your brain about some of this stuff. The last thing I wanted to sign off with is, we've talked a lot about how wrestling's impacted and changed your life. The show that you created, How We Roll, is out, and I just want to hear your thoughts. And like, now that you've had it and it's out, like, what's it like to have a show created and now it's out there forever?
Thanks. This show came to me as, and again, a guy who always loved sports. It was Brian Darcy James, who's a very notable actor. He was the original King George in Hamilton. He was in Spotlight. Also, he's a Broadway legend kind of guy. He's from Saginaw, Michigan, and he sent me this article about this guy. He sent it to CBS, and then they said, "Hey, Gross is from the Midwest. He's sort of a blue-collar guy. I think he might be right for this project." And I was working on something else at the time, but I read this little note that he had written, and it goes, there's this guy named Tom Smallwood. He's from Saginaw, Michigan. He worked at the auto plant. He worked at the factory and at the GM plant, and he was putting seatbelt brackets on Chevy Silverados, which isn't as much fun as it sounds like, for $16 an hour or whatever. And he got laid off 3 days before Christmas. And so he goes home to his wife, and he was a really good bowler. And he said, "I'm going to bowl. This is my dream. This is what I always wanted to do. Maybe now's the time to give it a chance." And that was so touching to me. The guy went on. The true story is, and I remember when it happened in 2009, it just stirred me. Like, this guy ended up going to the mom and pop bowling alley in Saginaw, bowled continually all day, 12 hours a day, just bowled. He goes on to not only get his PBA card and bowl and all that, he ends up winning the entire PBA championship at the end of that year, because he knew he had to win. And it's, again, to me, it's that wrestling mentality. So I was so drawn to this that I was like, something inside me said, you should write this show. So I wrote the pilot script for it, and I based it more, not so much on the actual Tom Smallwood. I based it more on my wife me saying, "Hey, I'm going to Los Angeles. I'm going to be a comic. You want to go?" And for whatever reason, normally a woman of great judgment and great taste said, "Yeah, I'll go with you." So off we went, and I never gave up, and she never gave up on me. And that's what this show is about. It's about a couple who believe in each other. And she said, "No, you have to do this." And the show. So we're in episode. I think episode 6 aired last night. The first season is always challenging, because you're trying to find the characters. The cast is trying to find the characters. It finishes incredibly strong. Episode 11, the finale, is really good. And it stars Pete Holmes, who's a very funny guy, Katie Lowe's, who was on Scandal, Shy McBride from Hawaii Five-0, and tons of others. John Larroquette. I mean, he goes all the way back to Larroquette. I remember him on that show. But Julie White, who's an amazing, insanely talented woman, and she's on Broadway right now doing a show, in fact. But it's a great cast, and it's very. I leaned into the humanity on this one, Ryan. I was like, lean into the heart, and so that's what I did. And it's about a blue collar family rolling the dice for a better life, and the guy happens to be a bowler. And I think anybody who, has dreamt of following their dream can relate to this, and will end up rooting for them. So
yeah, I really love the relationship between the husband and the wife in the show. So that's interesting. That was based on a lot of your personal experience. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. The whole speech about her saying, in the pilot, he's saying, there's two monologues. The pilot, he says, I got mad. Like his mother offers him this job, or says, hey, I can get you this job at this factory. And so he kind of has to take it now. So he can't follow his dream. So he's talking to his wife and he goes, you know what? And it's like, I don't have to be, I'm a dad and I'm a father. I don't have to be anything more than that. And then the 2 scenes later, his wife says, Katie says to Pete, you do have to. And, you have to. You have a son who's looking to you. And that's the way that I look at it for my daughter. When my daughter was born, I stopped doing stand-up and I started writing for television. And I was like, I have to succeed. Mm-hmm. I have to succeed. I have no other choice. This show has to stay on the air. And it all goes back to wrestling. I have to win. That is it. I have to, and I thank God for that passion and that drive and that belief, man. I don't know that I would have that. I 100% would not have my work ethic and my attitude were it not for Coach Pierce and Coach Tony and Joe Carr and Coach Tobin and all those guys that said, you got to believe, man. And so, anyway, so hopefully some of that comes across. And like I said, the series finishes really strong, and I encourage everybody to watch. It's on CBS on Thursday nights. And I thank you for having me on and giving me a little plug here.
Oh, it's so fun to have you on. I really appreciate the conversation. And I just love all the stories you told about your grandfather getting the TV and just the road 2 years. I mean, man, so many takeaways for me. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor to have you on, Mark.
Thanks, Ryan. I love the show, and I will continue to listen always. So thank you for doing what you do, man. It's really very inspiring.